Why hello, my brogos and ogresses. Let me tell you, there's nothing better than cozying up with a nice big book on a cold, rainy day, right? Who am I kidding? I live in the American West. We don't really have rainy days. But I do still like to read books and unplug from the internet for a while. And of course, I'm going to be reading a Shrek book. Now, coffee table books on animated movies are nothing new. Dreamworks always produces an art of book for every one of their new movies. But when the first Shrek came out, it wasn't always like that. Animated films were still not seen as justification for high art items like an art book. But when Shrek won at the Academy, it really changed things. Suddenly, animated films could win Oscars, and all the film people were like, wait a second, maybe film connoisseurs and adults enjoy this animated stuff. And we began getting art books ever since. The first one for the Shrek franchise was for Shrek 2. But because Shrek 1 was skipped, this book acts as an art book for Shrek 1 and 2. This is Shrek From the Swamp to the Screen by John Hopkins. And let me tell you, it is a treasure trove of information on the Shrek franchise. Not only is it a really nice summary of all of the public knowledge about the film's production, but this coffee table book is actually filled with information that you don't see anywhere on the internet. I find myself popping in this book frequently for research on my videos, and I'm continually amazed by how much information in here is not either common knowledge or available easily on the internet. So today, I'm not only going to recommend you buy your own copy, but join me for a brief look as we check out some of the highlights of Shrek From the Swamp to the Screen. Okay, so delving right into it, we have this very nice cover. Now, I've actually seen this book a lot at, bookstores without the dust jacket, and I just want to note that it's really boring without the dust jacket. It's just got the mice and then Puss in Boots there. So, if you do want to find it out in the wild, just look for a blank book with Shrek on the side and some mice. But I like it with the slipcover. And you know what? This book is cheap. You can get it for, practically nothing. So, here we are. Shrek From the Swamp to the Screen. And it's got a very nice intro here from Mike Myers talking about the character of Shrek. I like that he says, fathers are very passionate and they go from I love you to get out of my house in a matter of seconds. And none of them were ogres, but the fit was undeniable. And he talks a bit about Shrek and how he originally recorded Shrek in a full Canadian accent and then did it again in the Scottish accent, which I think is common knowledge at this point. There's nothing special there. Now, here's some interesting stuff. This is the beginning here, where we start to learn about Shrek being adapted, and you're gonna see history kind of warped, from the perspective of Jeffery Katzenberg. It says that Jeffery Katzenberg was handed a copy of a children's book, Shrek. How it was amazing. He says, irreverence, humor, and a wonderful heart, says Katzenberg. His idea was to meld the story potential of Shrek with state-of-the-art animation with PDI. Well, that's only partially true. Shrek languished for years in development hell. There was a studio called Propellerhead Studios that was the first studio to tackle Shrek. They did the Chris Farley cut test footage, so, it wasn't exactly as smooth, but there's some funny things here it mentions with Katzenberg. And then here's a nice bit about William Steig. Steig had a crazy career. He was born at the turn of the century and had a huge career doing stuff for the New Yorker. He did art books, and Shrek was something that came late in life. What's amazing is that Steig published Shrek during the last 10 years of his life, and he lived just long enough to see the movie release and die shortly before Shrek 2. So he got to see the film become a phenomenon. He drew a kid at a dinner table, and it said, I say it's spinach, and I say the hell with it. I guess that was funny in the 30s. What else were you going to laugh at? The Depression? Okay, so check this out. It says, I'll stick with you. You're a mean green fighting machine. But that's not the quote that's here. This is when Shrek is telling Donkey, well, why don't you run along with your friends? And that's where Donkey talks about how he has no friends. I'm all alone. What's funny about this render is it was used in a lot of promotional stuff. It was in the Shrek playing cards that we just looked at a few videos ago. And I was like, oh, there's that shot again. They really like this shot of Shrek leaning down to Donkey. Must have been on the press kit, used for a lot of licensing stuff. And then we get into this book's weirdness, right? Because it's going to talk a bit about how Vicky Jensen, the director of Shrek, adapted the book. And, it set the tone for what they wanted to make. But then we have a quote from Donkey. Man, that first Shrek was one nasty dude. Cool, but nasty. What? So, this book has, like, little excerpts where the characters of Shrek are, like, actors, and they're, like, chiming in on the behind-the-scenes stuff. It's so weird, but I can't help but love it. It's kind of like the, outtakes that used to be at the end of the Pixar films. It is so odd, some of the ones we'll see later here. Okay, this is hilarious. This is the rewriting of history right here. I just want to read you this sentence exactly as is. Pixar's Toy Story, considered by many at PDI to be the Snow White of CG animation, exploited these limitations brilliantly, with its relatively simple toy characters set against a visually striking but bleak suburban environment. Toy Story limitations. PDI, however, Ants marked a significant advance in CGI animation with its groundbreaking use of proprietary facial and fluid animation technology. Yeah, they're totally trash-talking Toy Story, and they're like, but Ants really push things forward. Now, that's what animation looked like. Here it talks a bit about Chris Farley, and from what I could gather, this seems to be some of the first official public acknowledgement that Chris Farley was intended to be Shrek and died, because that was kept from everyone. That was even kept from Mike Myers. Mike Myers went into the recording studio, and he's like, this character looks like Chris Farley. And they're like, no, it's not Chris Farley. But it was intended for Chris Farley. Here, Ellen Warner mentions that the film started to come together when the outhouse opening was put in. So originally the film didn't open up with the outhouse. It opened up with Fiona going to see a fortune teller named Dama Fortuna. And it kind of had this spooky horror movie, like black and white vibe to it. It was definitely very interesting, but it didn't quite tonally work with the movie. I mean, that outhouse opening is the most iconic aspect of the film. Even to this day, most people on the street would tell you, somebody once told me with Shrek throwing open the outhouse door. So, yeah, that was definitely the right call to make. What else we got here? There's lots of amazing technical information on here on how they rendered stuff like the lava and the mud here, and you can see in this very sexy shot of Shrek bathing here. I believe they mentioned in the commentary that this section where Shrek's bathing around in the mud was actually the last piece put into the finished movie because it took so long to render all of this mud. It completely overheated their computer systems, which I fully believe. I mean, this movie still looks so amazing for 2001. Shrek 1 aged so well. Watch the modern 4K release of it. You will be impressed by how aspects of it still look so good to this day. And the whole movie has this bright, colorful look to it. Shrek 1, in particular, reminds me so much of, a Windows background with all of these fields and these bright blue skies. Then you get some really interesting stuff, like Shrek's house here. Here are all the props and details that are in his dinner scene. And I just think stuff like this is really cool. I love this type of, detail and lore. Stuff we really don't need to know, like how Shrek place sets his meal, but I think it's interesting. It's good to know Shrek is a fan of the eels. I am too, man. Beautiful Freak, great album. Novocaine for the Soul, great song. Okay, here's the cornfield scene. Again, you can really see what I was mentioning, that bright, colorful look. Look how rich this shot is, but if you look at the concept artwork here, the lighting is much deeper, it's a lot more yellow and orange. Maybe they had anticipated the lighting engine being a bit better. But what you'll also notice, aside from the lighting difference of this shot, is the obvious difference that Shrek is the Chris Farley Shrek, with the Chris Farley hair there, the different build, versus the final version. Even Donkey, he looks a lot creepier here. He looks a lot more realistic and definitely uncanny, but a really cool piece of art nonetheless. It's neat. It's got a vibe. I dig it. So here it talks about a lot of the accolades that the film got, and again, it's very interesting stuff. I just don't have the time to cover it right now, but you should buy this book and check it out. Now, here are some cool concepts of Shrek. A lot of these I actually have not seen posted online, and I just think they're really neat, and also disturbing. Could you imagine if Shrek actually went with one of these designs in the final product? Would we still talk about the movie today? Well, we probably would, just because of how interesting these designs are. It'd be an oddity from the 90s, but he would not be the iconic character that defined the 2000s, that's for sure. He would have just been a footnote in the animation world. Now, Donkey here, this page is really neat. Some of these designs are freaky, like this one here, which almost looks like a Klasky Chupo character with the thick jawline there and the very exaggerated eyes and lips. But the one on this page that really speaks to me is this one here at the bottom. This kind of sad, almost nebbish-looking donkey with a toupee. So my theory on this one is I think this one may be one of the earliest donkeys on the page, because I speculate that this donkey was drawn when Donkey was intended to be Steve Martin, who was one of the original choices for Donkey before Eddie Murphy was chosen. Now, that would have been really early in development. I don't think there are any recorded voice lines of Steve Martin as Donkey. Nothing was ever put onto pen and paper, but unless one day that surfaces, that'd be very interesting if it did. But I do believe that was really early on. But, I mean, look at this donkey. It does have somewhat of a resemblance to Steve Martin in the 90s. Like, there's no doubt about that. Okay, now Puss in Boots here, obviously designed after the original Shrek, so we have a bit more of a defined art style to work with. Still, a lot of these designs look a bit closer to what you would see with a more common public domain depiction of the Puss in Boots character. Like, look at the colors here, how different they are. As somebody that collects Shrek, I look up Puss in Boots a lot on websites like eBay and Mercari. I'm always refreshing. But with Puss in Boots, it can be a little more difficult because there's literally 100 years of Puss in Boots collectibles. He's been a marketed character for well over a century. So there's all sorts of Puss in Boots merchandise that is of the public domain character and not the Shrek version of the character. And this design here just, I don't know, it's just not screaming Shrek. It just looks a little generic. But all of a sudden you get that orange in there, and it just looks so good up against the Shrek colors, you know. And Puss in Boots just looks great. But this finalized design is actually not finalized. He's got the twizzly mustache here that was cut from the movie. But that was done very late into production, so much so that if you have some of the old toys here for Shrek 2, you'll notice the twizzly mustache is sculpted onto Puss in Boots. I mean, look how off-model this figure is. This was the Burger King toy from America in the USA, and this was the Puss in Boots toy in the UK. And you'll notice they both have the twizzly mustache. Whereas the later figures, like this one from Shrek the Third, does not have the twizzly mustache. And eventually, Puss in Boots' design evolved as we got into the spin-off film, and finally his modern design, the Last Wish look, which is independent of the Shrek films, and I think looks great. I look forward to seeing that design incorporated into the Shrek universe. Eventually, it'll happen. And here's one of my favorite pages from the book. We have a full timeline of CG animation that has all sorts of interesting stuff. You can pause it here if you ever wanted to learn all about computer graphics. But I love that they included this because Shrek is an important achievement in the world of computer graphics. And yes, they do actually mention quite a few stuff from Disney, including some things I actually didn't know when reading this and leading up to Shrek. But you know, they weren't going to forget ants. I love that they include in 1998 Disney Pixar's A Bug's Life, and Ants was released. Yeah, they're never going to let that one go. And then we have, oh my, you know, I said the Shrek page was sexy. Control yourselves. Here is Lord Farquaad's naked body T-posing with all of his glorious chest hair. And you get a better look at, like, the mural that Farquaad has. And then we have some more behind-the-screen politics. This is that weird stuff I mentioned. Like, Donkey says here that Farquaad dude was a major prima donna. But, like, that's the character of Farquaad. Is the actor that plays Farquaad exactly like the character Farquaad? See, this is when we get into that weird Roger Rabbit situation where it's like, do the toon characters play one character and that's what they're cast as in the movie? I don't know. It's weird. But it's also weird that they chose to do this in a book that is so technical and not aimed for kids. Like, this book is aimed at animation enthusiasts. It's got a lot of technical information in it about lighting and rendering and all that good stuff. And what person reading that would want to know, like, how the characters are acting on set? It is just so odd. Apparently, before Shrek 2, Puss in Boots was living on a small farm in the countryside of Spain, all 14 of my brothers and sisters and my 37 half-brothers and sisters were getting on my nerves. Now I am living on the lap of luxury in Hollywood. I have yet to contact any of them. What? But let's see what other goodness we have here. Okay, so this is interesting. This is the honeymoon scene, right? The accidentally in love montage. And we have some concept artwork here, like Shrek shaving. But what's going on here? Here's Dragon and all of the fairy tale friends watching Shrek and Fiona. So this scene is actually mentioned in the director's commentary of Shrek 2. This was the original opening of the movie. So what we're seeing here with Shrek and Fiona being together was a filmed montage that Shrek and Fiona had made to show to the fairy tale friends. And you'll notice if you watch this scene, in the first section at the honeymoon hotel itself, Shrek is straightening the camera of the movie, as it's implied, to capture a shot of him and Fiona. But that originally would have set up that this was an actual filmed montage that Shrek had made to show to the fairy tale friends. So why was this neat little scene cut? Well, apparently during test screenings, audiences were very overwhelmed. The film would have opened up very loudly with Shrek and all of the fairy tale friends. You know, you got like Pinocchio and the pigs, and Dragon would have been present, who is only present in the post-credits scene in the final version of the film. And it was just overwhelming to be dropped into this fairy tale world, especially for someone that had not seen the first movie. Now, this is a sequel film. Of course, you're supposed to kind of know these characters, but at the same time, Shrek 2 can be overwhelming. It introduces so much. I mean, right from the get-go, you've got Shrek and Fiona, who's now turned into an ogress. So that's one new character in the form of Ogress Fiona. And then in the first, I would say 15 to 20 minutes, we're introduced to Harold and Lillian, Prince Charming and Fairy Godmother, and the entire world of Far, Far Away. It's honestly incredible how much Shrek 2 introduces and seamlessly incorporates into the world of Shrek and makes it feel like it's always been there. I mean, imagine watching this movie for the first time. It's a lot, and I think opening with all of these fairy tale characters would have been a bit much. And, you know, that's exactly what the producers and directors also felt. So that scene was cut, and they kind of had to retcon the situation with Dragon. Donkey mentions that she's moody when he's in the house with Shrek and Fiona. It's also very calming. It's a nice, easy opening with Shrek and Fiona together back at the house that kind of rides into the craziness and zaniness of the movie. Being dumped into this scene right here, which kind of feels a lot like the ending of the first film with all the fairy tale creatures dancing and singing, I think it would have been much. Shrek 2, it is an animated, colorful cartoon, but it's also just a solid comedy film, and you don't want it to be like too annoying and too off-putting to adult audiences. So I kind of respect them for cutting this and doing what they did. And I think it's interesting they left in that shot of Shrek straightening the camera at the beginning of the montage, because it still does kind of imply that this is something that Shrek had filmed. We just don't need to see him screening it to his fairy tale friends. We can all just assume that that's something that happened in the universe. But yeah, bet you didn't think about that when you see Shrek 2. Now you won't unsee it, him straightening the camera. That's because of this scene right here, the cut sideshow montage screening there. How about that? Okay, moving on. Here we get a look at the costume designs of Shrek, and this stuff is super neat. So Isis, she did a great job, because you can look at the concept artwork for Handsome Shrek there, and then compare it with the finalized model, which I have in action figure form. And yeah, it's pretty exact. The design didn't need any changes whatsoever. Fiona's dress here she wears, the white dress is really great. The green dress, and these dresses are different from other dresses Fiona has worn before. The Shrek 2 green dress is different. The easiest way to tell is with the action figures. You'll see the original one is, it doesn't have the poofy sleeves. It's not quite as regal. There's no necklace. And I think that makes sense. This was the dress that Fiona lived in the tower, so she would have, like, slept in this every day. You know, she would want to pack a dress to Far, Far Away that's a little fancier. But the interesting dress on here is the one that isn't used in the movie, and that's the fairy godmother dress for Fiona that she originally would have worn during the Far, Far Away ball, which we can actually see she's in her ogress form here, so she would have even worn this through the very end of the movie up until the credits. And I was thinking, wow, this dress is so whimsical and fairy tale-like. It fits so well in Shrek's world. Why would they have removed this in favor of a plain white dress? And I answered my question right there. It's that the dress fits Fiona, and it shouldn't. The Far, Far Away ball is supposed to represent the world Fiona doesn't belong in. It's Shrek and Fiona in the fancy bougie Beverly Hills. And when they turn into ogres, they're becoming their true selves, you know? Fiona telling Shrek at the end of the film, I want what any girl wants, to live with the ogre she married, is her telling Shrek, I don't want this idealized princess world. I want the true version of you I fell in love with, the ogre version, and, by extension, the ogre version of herself that she's now accepted. I think the ball gown should look a little tacky and generic, because Fiona is not herself in that scene. She's dancing with Prince Charming, who, you know, she's led to believe is Shrek, but she really knows it isn't Shrek. Yeah, I don't know, it just wouldn't have worked, so I get why they cut it. But hey, this book gives us a great look into this design. So how about that? So here we have the world of Far, Far Away being created, including stuff like the tour bus, which we would see again in Forever After. And I want to talk about this newspaper box here. Now, this is actually in the film. I believe it's on like the next page. You can see it. Yeah, look, there it is in the movie. It's right there. And this is really neat. So look at this. It says, from the Kingdom Inquisitor, Goldilocks behind bars. So Goldilocks is a criminal. And you may recall that Goldilocks and the Three Bears in Puss in Boots: The Last Wish are the Goldilocks crime family. That's literally what they're called. They are notorious criminals in the Shrek world. I wonder, like, if anyone that worked on Last Wish had seen this production piece and decided to incorporate this into the movie, because, I mean, Goldilocks being a criminal, that is very specific. I get all of Shrek is, like, twisted fairy tales, but, like, here we have in-universe Goldilocks being mentioned as a criminal. So even if it is by happenstance, trust me, Dreamworks, just say it was intentional. You'll look really smart and like you're building out this amazing cinematic universe that's interconnected. Oh, and we have the maquettes. Definitely my favorite page of the entire book, because as a collector of physical things, man, I can't help but look at all these Shrek 2 maquettes and drool. How I would love to one day add one of these to my collection. I mean, look at all the ones they did for King Harold. So who knows how many hundreds of these they made for the film. But yeah, they're really cool. And when I was a kid, I always thought the Shrek characters were just modeled on the computer, just like you would a video game, like just polygons put together. But that really wasn't the case. We're talking about literally thousands and thousands, probably millions of pixels and polygons and data. And because of how slow these computers were, you couldn't like sculpt, not like today where, you know, you can open up Blender or Maya and just play around and make some characters. You couldn't really do that. So the Shrek films were still made very analog in the sense that all of the character designs were finalized in these maquettes, and then they just scanned in the maquettes in the computer and modeled the characters off of that. So that is really interesting. Next page actually demonstrates this here with a series of photos that show just how we go from a physical in-world model to the computer model. I don't know why for the longest time, I just never assumed that these models had physical presence. But there they are. They really did exist. And wow, does naked Puss in Boots without his fur scare me. Look how kind of generic and freaky he looks. Oh my god. Okay, now we have Tom Hester here talking a bit about the design. It seems like he started in 96, and it says up until that point, most of the character work was sketches. So anything pre-96 would have been just flat sketches, and that would have been like really early on when Shrek was probably just being made in 2D. But when they switched to 3D animation, you know, you get the 3D designs here. So Hester here, he almost did design work for two movies. He did the Chris Farley cut of the film and the final cut of the film. And he does mention something really, really interesting here. So he says, as directors and producers gravitated towards a more humanized and vulnerable Shrek on the story level, so too did Hester with his clay sculptures. Early versions of Shrek were very fleshy with an extreme level of caricature. He was top-heavy with very thin legs for comedic effect, but over time, a more normalized anatomy began to take hold. An important turning point was when Mike Myers was cast for the voice of Shrek. We incorporated some aspects of Mike's eyes and eyebrows, says Hester. Once Shrek lost his hair, becoming totally bald, the final version of the character was close at hand. But look at what it says there. An important turning point was Mike Myers. We incorporated some aspects of Mike's eyes and eyebrows. So, as somebody that reviews toys, for me, Shrek's face and his eyes and eyebrows are such an important part of the character. For example, let's take one of the worst Shrek figures I've reviewed on the channel, and that's the Five Below Shrek. It's really bad, but why? I think it's the brows and the eyes. You'll see, though, these big, dark black brows, and they just don't look very Shrek-like at all. Then you have, like, the Hasbro Shrek, which is equally bad because the brows are too tiny. They're too thin. There's a nice happy medium, like the McDonald's Shrek here, and he has perfect brows and perfect eyes compared to some of the other figures. And the reason that's so key is because those are Mike Myers' eyebrows and eyes. They really are modeled after him. They were not kidding. And that feature makes or breaks an accurate Shrek. You know, even like the best Shrek figure, I've said, this one here, this is the Shrek the Third figure. It's an amazing figure, but the face always looked a little uncanny, and it's because the brows are just a bit off. They're too lightly colored, and they arch up a little too much. There's a nice happy medium with the eyes here. And that's really how you create a great Shrek collectible and an accurate depiction of the character, because when you lose those eyes and brows, you lose the Mike Myers to Shrek. Here's an entire page spread all about grass, leaves, and lighting. Yeah, it's very technical, but it puts it into a digestible and processable format that I think is super interesting. Look, I'm no computer guy. I'm actually really horrible with computers. I mainly just stick to the collectibles. But this stuff breaks it down and makes it interesting. For example, I always wondered why the toys for Shrek 1 always had Shrek in this dark olive green, whereas the later Shrek movie toys had this much lighter lime green. Well, it has to do with the film's lighting, not Shrek's design itself. Shrek 2 introduced volume shadows and global illumination, and these fancy little technical things changed Shrek's world, and they made the graphics look better. It's actually extremely similar to what you see in video games when they get, like, HD remakes and they, like, up the lighting. So yeah, you have more things reflecting off of Shrek naturally, and that lightens his skin tone. So that about wraps up my look at the Shrek coffee table book, From the Swamp to the Screen. I close here on the Livin' La Vida Loca scene, the greatest scene of the Shrek franchise. Although, it could have been a bit better, because look, we have Fiona with her hair down. Wouldn't that have been amazing to see on screen? I mean, we did eventually in Forever After and Shrek 5, but she would have taken her hair down earlier. See, these are the hard-hitting, behind-the-scenes facts that we wanted to know. But in all seriousness, this book is full of all sorts of neat things. I only featured a fraction of the good information you'll find in here that I often use for many of my videos, so I really do implore you to buy this book and read it front to cover religiously like I do, because I am crazy like that. So yeah, if you're looking a bit of Shrek in your life and you want that Shrek sweet lore. Okay, wait, I actually do have to stop on this page because it's merchandise related. I promise this is the last thing I'll ramble about. We get to see an up-close look at the in-universe action figures that Fiona owns above her fireplace. And man, these are like some of my most top-wanted Shrek figures for my collection. I would love some company to make these exact figures, as well as the little plush dragon, because, come on, they would look so great. Shrek even picks them up, like, he interacts with them, it's a key moment, and a cool prop replica. We need these as official merch. Here's a photo of the dog, the iconic dog from Shrek 2 that the internet loves. Here's a cut concept of Fiona riding like a little Shrek bouncing ball here. That wasn't used. But they did actually make this as a piece of merchandise. I've kind of looked at it and like contemplated buying one. I think it would be hilarious to bop around on one of these for a video. And then we'll close on this, the Fiona band posters. These are in the movie in Fiona's room, but the lighting is so dark, you can't really see them well unless you're watching the DVD. You know, in the theater, you wouldn't have seen them. And she likes Dragon Slayer, Loot Heroes, Stonehenge, that's a great name for a band, and of course, Chastity Belt. World Tour. She's into a band called Chastity Belt. Oh my god. Wow. And, they went with Sir Justin as the close-up we get in the final version of the film. And fun fact, that shot of Sir Justin was put in just for randomness. That was finalized before Cameron Diaz and Justin Timberlake hooked up. How about that? But, yeah, very prophetic, these Shrek movies, even to this day. So yeah, if you ever wanted to know useless information, like how Fiona enjoys a band called Chastity Belt, this is it. This is the book to get, from the swamp to the screen. But really, it is an amazing book, a treasure trove of ogre-filled goodness. So, thanks for joining me for a brief look at a cool book, and just listening to me ramble about Shrek stuff again, because that's what I like to do. So, thanks for watching, and from me to you, and the worst Shrek action figure in the world to you. My God, look at that face. He looks horrific. Have a happily ever after.